Black Plague is originated from Asia 2000 years ago and believed to spread to Europe by trading and Mongol invasion during the 13th century. Black Plague, also known as Bacterium Yersinia pestis, is a bacteria found in fleas. Its goal is to use fleas to infect other animals where they can increase their population. Black Plague can infect humans by rodents or flea bites. Moreover, it can transmit from person to person by airborne droplets such as coughing and sneezing. During the trade between Asia and Europe, rodents and fleas were able to use goods as their transportation. There are also other historical events that contribute to the spread of the Black Plague. In the year of 1345, Kaffa was sieged by the Mongol army led by General Khan Janibek. The Mongol built the makeshift camp surrounding the city. After many days passes by, the Mongol realized that their men were dying from mysterious diseases while Genoese were safe and sound behind their city wall. They decided to catapult the contaminated corpse over the city wall to make sure that the Genoese also suffered. This resulted in the outbreak of Black Plague that killed around 50 million people in the 14th century, almost 60% of the population due to lack of knowledge. Having Black Plagues is extremely painful during that time. It can cause painful inflammation, extreme weakness, abdominal pain, diarrhea, bleeding from your mouth, nose, and rectum, blackening of fingers, toes, and nose. Moreover, infected will be left to die as nothing can be done during that time. Due to the fear of contracting the disease, the production of goods and trading had to be stopped, as they were seen too dangerous for the peasant. Most people left their families, cities, and jobs to live in the countryside to save themselves. As a result, the economy became stagnant as nobody wanted to trade or do businesses. However, the life of the peasant became better during the pandemic as they experiencing the rise of worker demands. This was because the lord and master must increase the peasant wage to convince them to stay. The decrease of population greatly increased the value of peasants and serfs. Many nobles cannot feed himself without the labor of lower classes. This means that the survivor can negotiate for payment and better treatment as the lord will not risk to lose them. Therefore, the life of the lower classes greatly improved, and they were able to afford better living conditions and luxury items. This caused the lower classes to gain more power. Doctors during that time received their knowledge primarily on the work of Roman physician Galen, as well as the Hippocrates and Aristotle. However, this is proven to be no use, as the doctor failed to prevent the spreading of the disease, and the doctors were dying at an alarming rate. This was because they did not know what microorganism is, and no clue how it worked. Many people would turn to their religious beliefs, such as whipping themselves for their sins. Some might try to use traditional herbs or food to cure the disease, but it is no use. What they can do was quarantine themselves and social distancing. The peasants became much more choosy about their work as they became more valuable and rare. The king, nobles, and chiefs lose large amount of power as they cannot recruit enough soldiers and workers. They started to be challenged by the lower classes, such as when the peasant called Chasseur mocks the Canterbury Tales. This view later on caused the French peasant revolutions that changed the traditional belief of the mandate of heaven.
The novel coronavirus outbreak began in Wuhan, China in December. Many of those infected had visited a live animal market in Wuhan, and then expanded to nearly every corner of the globe, resulting millions of people around the world have been infected, and hundreds of thousands of others have died. People with COVID-19 have had a wide range of symptoms reported, ranging from mild symptoms to severe illness. Symptoms may appear 2 to 14 days after exposure to the virus. People with these symptoms may have COVID-19. Fever or chills, cough, shortness of breath, or difficulty breathing, fatigue, muscle or body aches, headache, new loss of taste or smell, sore throat, congestion or runny nose, nausea or vomiting, and diarrhea. The COVID-19 is thought to spread mainly from person to person, mainly through respiratory droplets produced when an infected person coughs or sneezes. These droplets can land in the mouth or noses of people who are nearby or possibly be inhaled into the lungs. Spread is more likely when people are in close contact with one another within about 6 feet. The economic damage caused by the COVID-19 pandemic is largely driven by a fall in demand, meaning that there are not consumers to purchase the goods and services available in the global economy. This dynamic can be clearly seen in heavily affected industries such as travel and tourism. To slow the spread of the virus, countries place restrictions on travel, meaning that many people cannot purchase flights for holidays or business trips. This reduction in consumer demand causes airlines to lose planned revenue, meaning they need to cut their expenses by reducing the number of flights they operate. Without government assistance, eventually, airlines will also need to reduce layoff staff to further cut costs. The same dynamic applies to the other industries. For example, with falling demand for oil and new cars, as daily commutes, social events and holidays are no longer possible. As companies start cutting staff to make up for lost revenue, to worry is that this will create a downward economic spiral when these newly unemployed workers can no longer afford to purchase unaffected goods and services. To use retail as an example, an increase in unemployment will compound to the reduction in sales that occur from the closure of shop fronts, cascading the crisis over to the online retail segment, which has increased throughout the crisis. It is this dynamic that has economists contemplating whether the COVID-19 pandemic could lead to a global recession on the scale of the Great Depression. The COVID-19 outbreak affects all segments of the population and is particularly detrimental to members of those social groups in the most vulnerable situations. Continues to affect populations, including people living in poverty situations, older persons, persons with disabilities, youth, and indigenous peoples. Early evidence indicates that the health and economic impacts of the virus are being borne disproportionately by poor people. For example, homeless people, because they may be unable to safely shelter in place, are highly exposed to the danger of the virus. People without access to running water, refugees, migrants, or displaced persons also stand to suffer disproportionately both from the pandemic and its aftermath. How we deal with the infected. If your symptoms are serious, you will stay in hospital and isolated from other patients to prevent further spread of the virus. If you are well enough to stay home, you must remain isolated in your home or accommodation until public health officers tell you it's safe to return to normal activities. This will usually be after at least 10 days from when you first started showing symptoms and 72 hours or 3 days after your symptoms are gone. Public health officers will contact you every day to check on your condition. They will also give you a phone number to call if you have questions. People who have had contact with you, including family members and people you live with, will need to isolate themselves for 14 days from their last contact with you. This includes contact in the 48 hours before your symptoms first appear. Predictions based on effects of the Black Plague. How will Thailand be affected? One thing for sure is that the economy in Thailand will be affected. Thailand's economy relies mostly on tourism and exporting of rice and raw rubber. Outside the country, without tourists visiting Thailand and unable to trade with other countries, as many countries isolate themselves, the income will decrease dramatically. Thailand needs to make some adjustments, such being self-reliant and do trade inside their own country. As there is no noticeable social classes, there will be no change in it. The education in Thailand may need to adapt to the new environment, such as making students study at home. Many people who used to do businesses in the market might need to use online platforms to trade. However, people who are not familiar to technology might be left behind, and the government might need to educate and prepare them for the future.